My neighbor called animal control with a fabricated complaint, hoping to send my senior rescue dog to a kill shelter out of sheer spite. She stood on her porch, sipping iced tea, smiling as the officer demanded I hand him over. Then I handed the officer my leather-bound identification case. The color drained from his face as he read my title. He realized he had just threatened the district director who controlled his department budget. The heavy pounding on my front door rattled the brass hinges. It was 8 in the morning on a Saturday. I stood in the foyer, tightening the belt of my robe. Barnaby, my 12-year-old golden retriever, let out a low, confused grumble from his orthopedic bed in the living room. I opened the door. 2 county animal control officers stood on my porch. The lead officer held a rigid capture pole. The metal loop at the end gleamed in the morning sun. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice flat and authoritative. "We received a priority dispatch. A neighbor reported an unprovoked attack by a large canine. We have orders to confiscate the animal for a mandatory 10-day quarantine at the county facility. Quarantine for a senior dog at the overcrowded county pound was a death sentence. The stress alone would shut down his aging organs before the isolation period ended." I looked past the officers. Standing on the pristine emerald lawn next door was Brenda. She wore a pastel golf shirt and held a glass of iced tea. As president of the local homeowners association, Brenda treated our suburban street like her personal fiefdom. She hated dogs. She hated me for ignoring her arbitrary landscaping demands. She offered a slow, triumphant smile, raising her glass in a mock toast. "My dog has severe arthritis and sleeps 14 hours a day," I told the officer, keeping my voice level. "He has not left this house all morning. Who filed the complaint?" The officer unclipped a radio from his belt. "We do not disclose caller identities. Step aside and surrender the animal. If you obstruct a confiscation order, I will summon police backup and you will be detained." He reached toward the doorframe, aiming to push past me. The metal loop of the capture pole swung closer. Brenda took a step forward on her lawn, eager to watch them drag my best friend out in a metal cage. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. Panicking validates an ambush. I turned around, walked to the entryway console, and picked up my leather wallet. I extracted a heavy brass badge embedded in a black leather case. I walked back to the threshold and held it up eye level with the officer, read the title I instructed. The officer squinted. His eyes scanned the engraved text. The stern bureaucratic mask on his face fractured. His posture crumbled. He lowered the capture pole, letting the metal tip clatter against the concrete porch. "You are Lauren?" he stammered, the color vanishing from his cheeks. "You are the District Director of Municipal Services Compliance." "Yes," I replied, my tone dropping to a quiet, lethal register. "I am the executive who audits the operational budget for the Department of Animal Care and Control. I oversee your division. Now tell me which field supervisor authorized a confiscation warrant without verifying medical bite records or conducting a preliminary neighborhood canvass." The second officer took a distinct step backward, shrinking toward the driveway. The lead officer swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. He looked at my badge, then looked across the yard at Brenda, realizing he had been weaponized for a petty suburban vendetta. "Ma'am, we received a direct call from the association president," the officer mumbled, shifting his weight nervously. "She bypassed dispatch. She claimed the dog mauled her niece." I looked at Brenda. The triumphant smirk had fallen off her face. She strained her neck, trying to understand why the armed officers were retreating instead of breaking down my door. "Note the false report in your official daily log." I told the officers, my gaze fixed on my neighbor. "Then get off my property before I initiate a formal review of your dispatch protocols." The officers mumbled hasty apologies, turned on their heels, and practically sprinted to their county truck. They sped away, leaving Brenda standing alone on her manicured lawn. The tea sloshed over the rim of her glass. She glared at me, her eyes narrowing with undisguised hatred. The initial ambush had failed, but the war for my home had just begun. "My name is Lauren. I am 32 years old, and I work as a municipal compliance executive. Before I tell you how a corrupt local politician and a bitter neighborhood tyrant lost their empires over a dog, take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments so I know where you are watching from." Brenda did not retreat after the animal control incident. Retreat required a level of self-awareness that she fundamentally lacked. Instead, she viewed my survival as an intolerable challenge to her authority. In the sterile, manicured landscape of our suburban subdivision, her position as the president of the Homeowners Association granted her a localized dictatorial power. She decided to use every bureaucratic weapon at her disposal to make my daily existence unlivable. The campaign of harassment escalated with brutal, relentless efficiency. I returned home late on a Tuesday evening after a grueling 10-hour shift, managing municipal compliance audits. The streetlights flickered against the wet pavement. I turned onto my street, anticipating the quiet sanctuary of my home. As I approached my property, my headlights illuminated a glaring empty space where my car should have been. I parked my work vehicle on the street and walked up my driveway. There were no skid marks, no shattered glass indicating a theft. Nailed to my front door was a neon orange sticker, "Notice of Towing. Vehicle improperly aligned within designated driveway perimeters. Association Code Violation 4B." I stared at the sticker, the sheer absurdity of the violation catching in my throat. My car had been parked in my own driveway, perhaps an inch over an imaginary boundary line Brenda had arbitrarily decided to enforce. She had ordered a private towing company contracted through the association to remove my vehicle while I was at work. Retrieving it from the impound lot would cost me $300 and half a day of navigating bureaucratic red tape. I pulled the notice off the door, the adhesive tearing slightly. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped inside. The air in the house felt heavy, suffocating. The harassment did not stop at the driveway. Over the next 2 weeks, my mailbox became a receptacle for daily intimidation. I received fine after fine printed on heavy cardstock bearing the association seal. A $50 penalty for grass exceeding the maximum height allowance of 2 inches, issued on a day it had rained too heavily to mow. A $100 fine for the shade of white paint on my window trim, which Brenda claimed was antique white rather than the mandated stark white. Another notice cited the placement of my garbage cans, alleging they were visible from the street for an hour past the permitted collection window. She was drowning me in paper, utilizing the association bylaws to drain my finances and exhaust my mental bandwidth. She wanted me to feel hunted every time I stepped out of my front door. The neighborhood which I had purchased into seeking a peaceful life was rapidly transforming into a hostile territory. The breaking point arrived on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen preparing Barnaby joint supplements when I heard the distinct harsh sound of power tools roaring to life in my backyard. I dropped the pill bottle and rushed toward the rear glass doors. 3 men in reflective work vests were standing on my property line. They were operating circular saws and heavy crowbars, systematically dismantling the reinforced cedar fencing I had installed just a month prior. The fence was designed specifically to keep Barnaby safe, ensuring his failing hips did not lead him wandering into the nearby traffic arteries. I pushed the glass doors open, sprinting barefoot across the damp grass. "Stop!" I yelled, waving my arms to get their attention over the screech of the saws. "What are you doing? That is my property." The workers paused, lowering their tools. The lead contractor wiped sweat from his brow and pulled a folded document from his pocket. "We have a work order from the association management office." The contractor grunted, entirely unsympathetic. "This structure violates the updated neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. We have orders to remove it and bill the homeowner for the labor." A movement caught my eye. Standing on her elevated back patio overlooking my yard, like a general surveying a battlefield, was Brenda. She held a steaming mug of coffee, watching the destruction with a placid, satisfied expression. I walked directly to the property line, ignoring the contractors. I looked up at her. "You approved this fence installation 6 weeks ago," I stated, my voice vibrating with restrained fury. "I submitted the blueprints. The board signed off on the height and the materials." Brenda took a slow sip from her mug. "The board retains the right to amend aesthetic guidelines at any time to preserve the character of the community." She replied, her voice drifting down from the patio, dripping with condescending superiority. That eyesore was ruining the sightlines. It looked like a prison compound. "We are a premier neighborhood, Lauren. We do not tolerate substandard structures just because your animal requires containment." She was intentionally destroying the only physical barrier protecting my dog. She was using the collective funds of the neighborhood to hire men to tear down a structure I had paid for with my own salary. You cannot alter an approved structure retroactively without a formal hearing. I argued, gripping the remaining wooden post. This is a targeted destruction of private property. Brenda smiled a tight, cold expression. Check the bylaws, Lauren. The president has executive discretion regarding immediate aesthetic remediation. If you have an issue, you are welcome to file an appeal at the next quarterly meeting. Until then, the fence comes down. She turned and walked back into her house, sliding the glass door shut behind her, sealing herself away from the chaos she had orchestrated. I stood in the center of my backyard, the cold morning air biting at my skin. The contractors resumed their work, the screech of the saw tearing through the remaining cedar planks. The boundary I had built to protect my home was reduced to splinters and sawdust. The suffocating nature of a tyrannical homeowners association is not just in the fines. It is the profound, terrifying realization that the walls of your own house do not offer protection. Brenda had weaponized the very community agreement designed to maintain order, turning it into a tool for localized terrorism. She could tow my car, fine my landscaping, and tear down my fences, all operating under the guise of neighborhood preservation. I watched the workers haul away the ruined wood. The vulnerability was absolute. I had purchased this house to provide a safe, quiet life for Barnaby in his final years. Instead, I had placed him directly in the crosshairs of a woman who viewed our existence as an insult to her authority. The administrative harassment was escalating, transitioning from annoying fines to the physical dismantling of my security. I needed to find a way to strike back, but the association bylaws were a labyrinth designed to protect the board. Brenda held all the administrative keys, and she was locking me out of my own life. The missing fence left my backyard, exposed a raw, open wound facing Brenda property. I altered my routine, refusing to let Barnaby outside unless I was standing directly beside him. The administrative warfare had drained my energy, but the true escalation arrived silently under the cover of early morning fog. It was a Tuesday. The sky was the color of slate, the air heavy with damp cold. I opened the sliding glass door, coffee mug in hand, and allowed Barnaby to step out onto the damp grass for his morning routine. He moved slowly, his arthritic joints protesting the chill. I stood on the patio watching him shuffle toward the edge of the property line where the cedar fence used to stand. I turned away for 3 seconds to set my mug on the patio table. When I looked back, Barnaby was not sniffing the bushes. He was hunched over his jaws, working methodically as he chewed something he had found hidden in the tall grass near the property boundary. A spike of pure adrenaline shot through my system. He never ate random yard debris. "Barnaby, drop it!" I shouted, sprinting off the patio and across the wet lawn. He looked up at me, a large dark lump of raw meat hanging halfway out of his mouth. As I closed the distance, the details of the meat came into sharp, horrifying focus. It was a thick wad of raw ground beef, but the surface was glittering. Embedded deep within the red meat were hundreds of tiny, jagged, bright blue crystals. The air vanished from my lungs. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I hit the grass hard, dropping to my knees. I grabbed Barnaby heavy jaw with both hands, prying his mouth open with a frantic, desperate strength I did not know I possessed. "Spit it out!" I screamed, plunging my fingers directly into the back of his throat. The rough texture of his tongue and the sickening squish of the raw meat met my fingertips. I dug deep, hooking my index finger around the mass and ripping it out of his mouth. The meat fell onto the grass, scattering the bright blue crystals across the mud. Some of the crystals had already dissolved, leaving a toxic neon blue residue staining the edges of the beef. Barnaby coughed, shaking his head, confused by my sudden violence. I did not pause to comfort him. I grabbed him around his midsection, hoisting his 70-pound weight into my arms, ignoring the sharp protesting pain in my own back. I ran to the car, threw open the back door, and shoved him onto the seat. I did not grab my purse. I did not lock the front door. I slid behind the wheel, slammed the car into reverse, and tore out of the driveway. The drive to the emergency veterinary clinic took 12 agonizing minutes. I ran 3 red lights, leaning on the horn, my vision blurring with terror. I carried him into the sterile, brightly lit lobby, shouting for help before the automatic doors even slid shut. The veterinary staff rushed out, taking one look at the blue residue on my hands and the lethargic, drooling dog in my arms. They whisked him through double doors into the trauma bay, leaving me standing alone in the waiting room, my clothes stained with mud and toxic meat juice. The next 3 hours were a purgatory of fluorescent lights and ticking clocks. I paced the linoleum floor, my mind looping the image of those bright blue crystals. The administrative fines, the towed car, the torn-down fence. They all paled in comparison to the sheer calculated evil of poisoned meat. The head veterinarian finally emerged. She looked exhausted, her scrub slightly rumpled. We pumped his stomach and administered activated charcoal. The doctor said, her voice grave. He ingested a significant amount of brodifacoum. It is an extremely potent lethal rodenticide. The blue crystals you described are the standard dye used in commercial rat poison. If you had not physically extracted the meat when you did, the internal hemorrhaging would have killed him within hours. I leaned back against the reception counter, closing my eyes, as a profound, shuddering wave of relief washed over me. He was going to survive. He requires intensive monitoring for the next 48 hours. The doctor continued, her expression hardening. Lauren, dogs do not accidentally ingest ground beef stuffed with rat poison. Someone intentionally prepared that meat and placed it where he would find it. This was a targeted poisoning. I nodded, the relief rapidly hardening into a cold, terrifying rage. I know exactly who did it. I left Barnaby in the care of the veterinary staff and drove back to my house. The neighborhood was quiet, bathed in the deceptive, peaceful light of midday. I walked up my driveway, my clothes still caked in mud. Tucked neatly into the seam of my front door, fluttering slightly in the breeze, was a small, folded piece of white paper. I pulled it free and opened it. The message was printed in block, computerized text, designed to be untraceable. This neighborhood does not harbor dangerous stray animals. I crushed the paper in my fist. I did not need a handwriting analysis to identify the author. The cowardice of the anonymous note was classic suburban terrorism. I turned my head slowly, looking across the property line toward Brenda House. The large bay window overlooking my yard was dark, but a distinct movement caught my eye. The heavy floral drapes twitched, falling back into place just as I looked up. She was watching me. She was waiting to see if her assassination attempt had succeeded. She had crossed the line from bureaucratic harassment to attempted murder. She wanted to kill the only living creature that brought me comfort, simply to assert her dominance over a property line. I walked into my house and locked the door. I did not collapse onto the sofa and weep. Tears were a biological response to tragedy, and this was not a tragedy. This was an act of war. I opened my laptop and bypassed the standard consumer websites. I accessed a specialized security supply distributor I utilized during my tenure managing municipal facility compliance. I ordered 4 high-resolution infrared motion-activated microcameras. The units were designed for covert surveillance in extreme environments, capable of recording crystal-clear footage in total darkness without emitting a single visible light. I paid for expedited overnight shipping. When night fell, I dressed in dark clothing and stepped out into my backyard. The air was freezing, the sky devoid of stars. I moved silently along the property line where the cedar fence had once stood. I mounted the microcameras strategically, one hidden within the dense foliage of an oak tree, another tucked beneath the eaves of my back porch, and 2 positioned low along the retaining wall, aiming directly at the invisible boundary separating my yard from Brenda pristine lawn. I wired the receivers to a dedicated encrypted hard drive hidden inside my utility closet. Brenda believed she operated with total impunity, shielded by the darkness and her title as association president. She thought throwing poisoned meat over a property line was an untraceable crime. She was about to discover that the dark is only safe until someone turns on the right kind of camera. The emotional devastation was over. The tactical surveillance had begun. I brought Barnaby home 3 days later. He moved with a sluggish, careful gait, the toxins having taken a heavy toll on his senior body, but he was alive. I settled him onto his orthopedic bed in the living room and locked the front door. The covert infrared cameras were actively recording every millimeter of the property line. I felt a grim sense of preparedness. I was waiting for Brenda to make another physical move. The attack, however, did not come from the shadows of the backyard. It arrived via certified mail on a Thursday afternoon. I signed for the thick, heavy envelope delivered by the postal worker. The return address bore the official seal of the City Planning Commission. My professional instincts, honed by years of managing municipal compliance, flared instantly. The Planning Commission did not send certified letters to residential addresses unless a significant legal action was imminent. I sat at the kitchen table, slicing the envelope open with a butter knife. I unfolded the dense stack of legal documents. The header on the first page read, "Notice of severe zoning violation and order of abatement." I read through the preliminary clauses, my confusion rapidly curdling into a deep, sickening dread. According to the official document, a recent municipal survey had determined that the rear structural foundation of my house encroached upon a protected public utility easement. The document alleged that my property line had been illegally extended by the previous owner, and that a full 30% of my house, including the master bedroom and the sunroom, was currently occupying city land. The abatement order was absolute. I was mandated to either demolish the encroaching portions of my home at my own expense within 60 days or face immediate asset seizure through eminent domain. I dropped the papers onto the table. The sheer impossibility of the claim was staggering. When I purchased the house 4 years ago, a comprehensive title search and a physical property survey had confirmed every boundary line. My house was built in the late 80s. The foundation had not moved. This was not a bureaucratic error. It was a targeted, fabricated legal assault. My cell phone rang, shattering the quiet of the kitchen. The caller identification displayed a restricted number. I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Hello? Lauren?" The voice on the other end was smooth-polished and exuded an oily, unearned familiarity. "This is Councilman Davis. I wanted to reach out personally regarding the unfortunate notice you likely received today from the Planning Commission." Councilman Davis was the local representative for our district, a politician notorious within municipal circles for his aggressive pro-development voting record and his aggressively slick fundraising campaigns. He was also a frequent guest at the lavish neighborhood block parties Brenda hosted every summer. "Councilman," I replied, my tone cautious. "I am looking at a fabricated zoning violation demanding I demolish a third of my home. The property survey on file clearly refutes this claim." Davis chuckled, a soft, patronizing sound. "Municipal surveys are updated frequently, Lauren. The city is expanding its utility infrastructure, and strict adherence to historical easements is currently a major initiative. The legal reality is that fighting a municipal abatement order is a protracted, devastatingly expensive endeavor. You would be facing years in civil court against the city limitless legal budget." He paused, letting the threat of financial ruin hang in the air. However, Davis continued, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial register. "I am a proponent of pragmatic solutions. I hate to see a constituent displaced by bureaucratic red tape. I have spoken with a private development firm, Horizon Properties. They specialize in acquiring challenging parcels. They are willing to purchase your home, as is assuming all zoning liabilities." He was offering a lifeline that looked suspiciously like a noose. "They are offering to buy my house." I asked, tracing the edge of the legal document on the table. "For what price?" Davis named a figure that was approximately 40% below the current market value of my home. It was a predatory, insulting offer designed to exploit desperation. "It is a cash offer, Lauren. Fast closing. No inspections." Davis urged, the smooth veneer slipping slightly to reveal the aggressive salesman beneath. "You hand over the deed, you walk away with enough capital to start fresh in a more suitable neighborhood, and the city drops the abatement order. It is the cleanest exit strategy you have. Think about it. I will have Horizon representative contact you tomorrow." He ended the call before I could ask another question. I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the phone. The pieces of the puzzle aligned with terrifying precision. Brenda had not merely reported my dog or complained about my fence. She had leveraged her relationship with a corrupt city councilman to retroactively alter the municipal zoning maps. Horizon Properties was almost certainly a shell corporation linked to Brenda or Davis, a corporate entity created to purchase distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. They had manufactured a devastating legal crisis to forcefully devalue my home, intending to buy it out from under me, demolish it, and likely develop the combined land into a lucrative commercial or high-density residential project. This was the ultimate ambush. The poisoned meat was a cruel, vindictive distraction compared to the systemic, coordinated corruption currently seeking to erase my financial existence. I was boxed into a perfectly engineered trap. If I fought the zoning violation in civil court, the legal fees would drain my savings, and the city could still execute an eminent domain seizure during the prolonged litigation. If I surrendered and accepted the predatory buyout from Horizon Properties, I would lose the home I loved, forfeit hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity, and hand a total victory to the corrupt politician and the malicious neighbor who orchestrated the theft. Brenda and Davis believed they had isolated me. They assumed I was a standard, easily intimidated civilian who would fold under the pressure of a government seal and a predatory phone call. They thought the threat of demolition would force me to pack my bags and run. They did not know that threatening a compliance executive with fraudulent municipal paperwork is the equivalent of handing a loaded weapon to a sniper. The battle was no longer confined to the property line in my backyard. It had escalated into the realm of systemic documented corruption. I needed more than a lawyer. I needed a forensic specialist capable of tracing the digital blood trail between a corrupt councilman and a neighborhood tyrant. It was time to call my brother-in-law. I drove to my sister house in complete silence, my mind dissecting the zoning documents resting on the passenger seat. The sheer audacity of the fabricated abatement order suggested a level of systemic corruption that extended far beyond a petty neighborhood squabble. Brenda and Councilman Davis were operating with the reckless confidence of individuals who had successfully executed this maneuver before. I needed a structural analysis of their alliance, and I knew exactly who possessed the tools to dismantle it. Sarah opened the front door before I even knocked, having seen my car pull into the driveway. She took one look at my tense posture and the thick manila envelope in my hand, and immediately stepped aside, gesturing toward the back hallway. "I is in his office," Sarah said quietly, her expression serious. Jamal was a state investigative auditor, a forensic specialist tasked with untangling complex webs of municipal embezzlement and corporate fraud. He operated in a world of encrypted ledgers, shell companies, and digital paper trails. When I walked into his home office, he was staring intently at a grid of 3 monitors, analyzing a cascade of financial data. I set the zoning documents and the notes from my phone call with Councilman Davis on the desk beside his keyboard. "I need you to trace a corporate entity," I stated, my voice devoid of pleasantries. "Horizon Properties. They submitted a predatory cash offer on my house 2 hours after the city issued a fabricated zoning abatement order requiring me to demolish a third of my home." Councilman Davis personally delivered the offer. Jamal did not offer sympathetic platitudes. He did not ask how I was feeling. He recognized the tone of a professional requesting a tactical strike. He picked up the abatement order, scanned the municipal seal and the signature block, and then looked at the name of the development firm I had written down. A politician acting as a real estate broker for a private firm immediately following a punitive municipal action. Jamal muttered, his fingers already flying across his mechanical keyboard. "That is not just a conflict of interest, Lauren. That is textbook racketeering." He accessed a secure state-level database restricted to investigative auditors. He bypassed the superficial corporate registries and initiated a deep dive into the beneficial ownership structure of Horizon Properties. The screens flickered as his software compiled years of disparate public filings, tax records, and municipal contracts. I stood behind his chair watching the digital architecture of the corruption materialize. Horizon Properties is a blind shell corporation registered in Delaware. Jamal explained, his eyes tracking the data lines. But the registered agent listed on the incorporation documents is a law firm based here in the city, a law firm that just so happens to represent the local Homeowners Association board. My breath caught in my throat. "Brenda." Jamal nodded, executing a secondary query to trace the capital flow. He linked the Horizon Properties accounts to a series of municipal vendor contracts approved by the city council over the past 3 years. "This is much larger than a personal vendetta against your dog, Lauren," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a low, intense register. "Brenda and Davis are not just trying to force you out because they dislike you. They are running a coordinated blockbusting operation." He pulled up a digital map of my neighborhood. Several parcels surrounding my property, including 2 houses at the end of the street, were highlighted in red. Horizon Properties has quietly acquired 4 distressed residential parcels in your immediate vicinity over the past 18 months. Jamal noted, tapping the screen. In every single case, the homeowner received a severe, unexpected municipal penalty. Massive association fines, sudden zoning violations, or aggressive code enforcement actions initiated by the city. The pattern was chillingly clear. They were systematically terrorizing homeowners, utilizing the association bylaws and the City Code Enforcement Division to artificially devalue the properties. Once the residents were buried in insurmountable legal and financial pressure, Davis swooped in to offer a predatory cash buyout through their shell company. They are forcing people out to consolidate the lots. I deduced the sheer scale of the criminality snapping into focus. Why? Jamal pulled up a preliminary zoning proposal that had been quietly submitted to the City Planning Commission last month, sponsored directly by Councilman Davis, because they want to rezone the entire block for commercial use. Jamal revealed opening a rendering of a massive multi-story retail complex. Davis is pushing a municipal redevelopment initiative. If Horizon Properties controls the contiguous residential lots, they can sell the consolidated parcel to a major commercial developer for an astronomical profit. Your house is sitting right in the middle of their proposed commercial footprint. You are the final holdout. The poisoned meat, the towed car, the dismantled fence. None of it was truly about aesthetic guidelines or neighborhood safety. It was a calculated siege. Brenda had leveraged her power as the association president to initiate the harassment, while Davis utilized his political authority to deliver the decisive municipal death blow. They were using the government to steal homes. Jamal's fingers continued to move across the keyboard, executing a final targeted trace on the banking routing numbers associated with the Horizon Properties escrow accounts. They have grown careless. Jamal stated, a cold satisfaction creeping into his tone. They are laundering the profits from the forced property sales through a series of municipal consulting contracts approved by Davis Committee. The funds are being funneled back into a private trust account. He hit the print command. The laser printer in the corner of the office hummed to life, spitting out a thick stack of financial documents. Jamal gathered the papers and handed them to me. The primary beneficiary of that private trust account is Brenda. Jamal confirmed, locking eyes with me. And the secondary signatory is Councilman Davis. I took the stack of papers. The sheets felt heavy, loaded with the irrefutable evidence of a massive, coordinated federal crime. The personal war for my backyard had just evolved into a high-stakes battle against systemic political corruption. They think you are an isolated, desperate homeowner who will panic and sign the deed to save yourself from bankruptcy, Jamal said, leaning back in his chair. They have no idea they just handed an extortion demand to a compliance executive with a state auditor in her family. I looked down at the routing numbers and the fake consulting contracts. The anger that had burned inside me was completely gone, replaced by a profound, icy clarity. I did not want to merely save my house. I wanted to dismantle their entire operation and salt the earth so they could never rebuild. "What is the play, Lauren?" Jamal asked, his expression serious. "Do we hand this over to the Federal Bureau right now?" I shook my head, slipping the documents into my bag. If we hand this to the authorities prematurely, Davis will use his political connections to stall the investigation. He will claim the shell company is a legitimate investment group and tie the evidence up in bureaucratic red tape for years. We need to force them to execute the crime publicly in a setting where they cannot control the narrative or hide behind their titles. I looked at the fabricated zoning abatement order resting on the desk. Davis wants me to sign my house away. I said, my voice steady and cold. I am going to let him believe he succeeded. I am going to let them set the stage for their own execution. The arsenal Jamal had provided sat securely on an encrypted drive inside my briefcase. I had the financial routing numbers, the shell company documents, and the proof of the blockbusting operation. I planned to finalize the strategy over the weekend, building an airtight dossier to deliver directly to the state attorney general. I believed I controlled the timeline. I believed I had the advantage of stealth. I underestimated the speed and the sheer unadulterated viciousness of a corrupt politician, realizing his target might not fold easily. I arrived at the Municipal Administration Building on Friday morning, preparing to lead the weekly compliance briefing for my department. The executive conference room was filled with 25 of my direct reports, senior analysts, and regional coordinators. I stood at the head of the table, organizing my notes on the upcoming budget audits. The heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open with a forceful, commanding push. The room fell silent instantly. The sudden interruption was highly irregular. Councilman Davis strode into the room accompanied by the Director of Municipal Human Resources and 2 armed building security officers. Davis wore a sharp dark suit projecting the absolute authority of an elected official. He did not possess the legal right to interrupt an internal departmental briefing, but his political influence clearly cowed the Human Resources Director, who trailed behind him looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. Davis stopped at the head of the table, turning his back to me and addressing my staff. "Ladies and gentlemen, this briefing is concluded," Davis announced, his voice booming across the silent room. "You are all dismissed. Return to your desks immediately." My staff exchanged bewildered, panicked glances. They looked to me for guidance. I stood perfectly still, my heart hammering a rapid warning rhythm against my ribs. I gave them a small, tight nod. They gathered their laptops and filed out of the room, quickly eager to escape the sudden toxic atmosphere. When the heavy doors clicked shut, leaving only myself, Davis, the Human Resources Director, and the security guards, the political theater truly began. Lauren, the Human Resources Director, began, her voice trembling slightly. "We have received a formal, highly disturbing ethics complaint regarding your conduct outside of this office." Davis stepped forward, effectively taking control of the execution. He tossed a thick-bound portfolio onto the conference table. The cover bore the official seal of my neighborhood homeowners association. "This portfolio contains over a dozen sworn complaints from the residents of your subdivision." Davis stated, his tone dripping with manufactured outrage. "It details a prolonged aggressive campaign of harassment, intimidation, and the abuse of your municipal authority to terrorize your neighbors." I stared at the thick stack of paper. Brenda had not been idle. She had mobilized her loyalists on the association board, coercing or fabricating complaints to construct an overwhelming narrative of my supposed instability. "These complaints allege that you explicitly threatened the association president with retaliatory municipal audits." Davis continued, raising his voice to ensure the severity of the accusation landed heavily in the room. "They claim you are harboring a dangerous, violent animal and that you have repeatedly utilized your badge to intimidate local law enforcement and animal control officers when they attempted to investigate." He looked at the Human Resources Director, demanding her compliance. "A municipal executive who uses her office to threaten private citizens is a severe liability to this city. The allegations are entirely fabricated." I countered, keeping my voice level and cold. "This is a retaliatory smear campaign orchestrated by a corrupt association president who is currently under investigation." Davis did not let me finish. He slammed his hand down onto the portfolio. "Do not attempt to gaslight this department, Lauren. We have the sworn affidavits. The city cannot employ an executive who behaves like a neighborhood tyrant." The Human Resources Director stepped forward, avoiding my eyes entirely. She handed me a stark single-page document. "Pending a full internal investigation into these ethics violations, you are placed on immediate administrative suspension without pay." She recited, reading the corporate execution script. "You are required to surrender your municipal identification badge, your access keys, and your company laptop immediately." The breath left my lungs. They were not just firing me, they were executing a public, humiliating defrocking. Davis had leveraged his political capital to force the Human Resources Department to bypass standard investigatory protocols. He was stripping me of my income, my authority, and my professional dignity in a single devastating strike. "Hand over the badge, Lauren." Davis commanded, a sickening, victorious smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. I looked at the 2 security guards standing near the door, their hands resting near their duty belts. I had no leverage in this room. Davis had rigged the tribunal. If I fought back now, I would be dragged out of the building in handcuffs, validating the false narrative of my erratic behavior. I reached up and unclipped my leather badge holder from my lapel. I placed it deliberately onto the table. I unhooked my municipal keys from my belt and set them beside the badge. Finally, I closed my laptop and pushed it toward the Human Resources Director. I executed the surrender with slow, precise movements. I refused to let my hands tremble. I refused to let Davis see a single tear. The security guards moved forward, flanking me on either side. "We will escort you to the exit," one of the guards stated gruffly. As I turned to walk toward the door, Davis stepped into my path, forcing me to stop. He leaned in incredibly close, invading my personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne was overpowering. He lowered his voice so that only I could hear the extortion. "I told you to take the buyout offer, Lauren." Davis whispered, his tone venomous and absolute. "This is what happens when you refuse to play ball. I will make sure the ethics board revokes your compliance certifications permanently. You will never work in municipal government again. Sign the deed over to Horizon Properties, pack your bags, and get out of this state before I decide to truly ruin your life." He stepped back, adjusting his tie and offering a cold, dismissive nod. I walked out of the conference room and down the long corridor flanked by the security guards. Dozens of my colleagues and subordinates watched me from their cubicles, their faces a mixture of shock and pity. I was being paraded through the department I had managed for years like a common criminal. The public humiliation was designed to break my spirit, to ensure that the isolation and the financial terror would force me to capitulate. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the bright, harsh sunlight of the city plaza. I had no job. I had no income. I was facing a fabricated zoning order that threatened to demolish my home, and the political machinery of the city was actively working to destroy my career. Davis believed he had crushed me completely. He believed the overwhelming application of institutional power would force me to sign away my property just to escape the relentless pressure. He thought he had severed my only means of defense when he confiscated my badge. He was incredibly wrong. He had not disarmed me. He had merely freed me from the bureaucratic constraints of my position. I was no longer a city employee bound by internal protocols and departmental politics. I was a private citizen holding irrefutable evidence of a massive federal crime, and I was about to unleash a level of retaliation that a local councilman could not even begin to comprehend. The corporate execution was over. The total war had begun. The silence of my house was absolute when I unlocked the front door. The heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding into place felt less like security and more like the ceiling of a tomb. Barnaby lifted his head from his bed, offering a weak thump of his tail, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality that his owner was now unemployed, facing a fabricated municipal demolition order, and targeted by a corrupt political machine. I did not sit on the couch to process the shock. I did not allow myself the luxury of a breakdown. Despair is a paralyzing emotion, and I had no time to be paralyzed. Davis and Brenda had accelerated the timeline. They wanted me panicked, rushing to sign their predatory buyout offer simply to stop the bleeding. I walked directly into my home office and booted up my personal desktop. I bypassed the standard networks connecting my computer to the encrypted hard drive hidden inside the utility closet. The covert infrared microcameras had been recording continuously along the property line since the night Barnaby was poisoned. I sat in the dark room, the glow of the monitors casting sharp shadows across my face. I opened the surveillance software and began scanning the high-definition footage, specifically targeting the early morning hours preceding the poisoning incident. The task was tedious, scrolling through hours of static grayscale night vision footage, the wind blowing through the trees, a raccoon darting across the lawn. Then, at exactly 2:14 in the morning on Saturday, the motion sensors triggered the primary camera positioned under the eaves of my back porch. I paused the playback, leaning closer to the screen. The infrared lens captured the distinct silhouette of a figure moving stealthily across Brenda's immaculate backyard. The figure approached the property line where the cedar fence had been dismantled. The night vision technology illuminated the facial features perfectly. It was Brenda. She wore a heavy robe over her pajamas, clutching something small and dark in her right hand. I watched as she stopped at the edge of my lawn. She looked around cautiously, ensuring the street was empty. Then, with a quick, deliberate motion, she tossed the dark object over the invisible boundary line. It landed silently in the tall grass near the bushes, precisely where Barnaby would find it hours later. She had executed the attempted assassination of my dog with chilling, premeditated efficiency. I exported the video clip immediately, saving it to a secure, partitioned folder. I had the irrefutable evidence of her animal cruelty. I had the visual proof connecting her directly to the poisoned meat. It was enough to secure a felony conviction, but I knew it was not enough to dismantle the entire operation. Arresting Brenda for poisoning a dog would not expose the massive real estate fraud or bring down Councilman Davis. I resumed the playback, increasing the playback speed. I intended to monitor her movements back to her house to ensure no other tainted meat was thrown. 15 minutes later on the recording, the motion sensors on the camera aimed at the front of Brenda property triggered. A sleek black luxury sedan pulled smoothly into her driveway, its headlights cutting off instantly. I slowed the footage to real time. The driver door opened. A tall man stepped out into the cold night air carrying a thick leather briefcase. Even in the grayscale infrared footage, the sharp tailored lines of his suit and his confident, arrogant posture were unmistakable. It was Councilman Davis. Why was a sitting city councilman visiting the neighborhood association president at 2:30 in the morning, 15 minutes after she attempted to poison a dog? I watched as Brenda opened her front door before he even reached the porch. She did not invite him inside. They stood in the shadows of her covered entryway, engaging in a tense, hushed conversation. I activated the audio enhancement software. When I installed the micro cameras, I had paired them with directional parabolic microphones designed to capture clear audio across the property line. I isolated the audio track from the front camera, filtering out the ambient wind noise and boosting the vocal frequencies. The crisp, unmistakable voice of Councilman Davis crackled through my speakers. I secured the municipal abatement signatures this afternoon. Davis stated his tone businesslike and impatient. The Planning Commission stamped the zoning violation. It will hit her mailbox on Thursday. Brenda crossed her arms, shivering slightly in her robe. Is Horizon Properties ready with the buyout offer? They are prepared to execute the cash transfer the moment she signs the deed. Davis confirmed, shifting the heavy briefcase to his other hand. The commercial developers are getting restless, Brenda. They want the entire parcel consolidated before the end of the quarter. The demolition permits are already drafted and sitting on my desk. We just need to force the compliance bitch out of that house, and the investment fund will release the $10 million development payout to our escrow accounts. Brenda let out a soft, venomous laugh. She will fold. I made sure her little mutt will not be a distraction much longer, and you just stripped her of her salary. She has no resources left. She will sign the house over to Horizon just to escape the pressure. Davis nodded sharply. See that she does. We are too close to the payout to let a single stubborn homeowner derail the commercial zoning block. He turned and walked back to his sedan, the transaction complete. I hit the pause button. The audio recording ended, leaving my office in absolute stunning silence. I stared at the frozen image of Councilman Davis walking away from Brenda porch. The sheer magnitude of the evidence I had just captured was breathtaking. This was not merely a recording of a politician discussing a real estate deal. This was a clear, unadulterated confession of an organized criminal conspiracy. I possessed crystal-clear audio of a sitting city councilman confirming his direct involvement in fabricating municipal zoning violations to illegally devalue private property. I had him on tape admitting to a $10 million payout from a commercial development fund contingent upon the successful extortion of my home. And I had Brenda casually admitting to the attempted murder of my dog as a tactical maneuver to isolate me. They had operated with the arrogant assumption that the darkness of a suburban night offered total immunity. They believed they were untouchable, shielded by their titles and their political connections. They had no idea they had just narrated their own federal indictments directly into a high-definition microphone. I did not feel the crushing weight of the suspension anymore. The humiliation I experienced in the municipal building evaporated entirely. I was no longer a victim scrambling to defend my property. I was the architect of their impending destruction. I initiated a secure encrypted backup protocol. I transferred the raw video files, the enhanced audio tracks, and the time-stamped metadata onto 3 separate solid-state drives. I placed one drive in a fireproof lockbox. I tucked the second drive into my purse. The third I prepared for immediate delivery. The local police department would be useless. If I handed this evidence to a precinct captain, Davis would use his political leverage to bury the investigation before a detective even reviewed the footage. I needed to bypass the local infrastructure entirely. I needed to execute a strike that Davis could not see coming, utilizing a jurisdiction that operated far beyond the reach of a corrupt city councilman. The time for defensive maneuvers was over. The definitive counterattack was fully armed, and I knew exactly where to aim it. The morning air was sharp and unforgiving when I guided Barnaby out to the car. He moved with a stiff, cautious reluctance, the residual weakness from the poisoning still evident in his slow gait. We had a scheduled follow-up appointment at the premier veterinary clinic in the district, a facility known for its advanced diagnostic capabilities. I lifted his 70-pound frame gently into the back seat, securing his harness. The encrypted hard drive containing the surveillance footage burned like a hot coal in my purse. The veterinary clinic lobby was bustling with morning appointments. The sleek modern waiting room featured expensive leather seating, complimentary espresso machines, and a large digital donor wall displaying the names of prominent community sponsors. I checked in at the reception desk, keeping Barnaby close to my side. He leaned his heavy head against my leg, seeking comfort in the unfamiliar environment. I took a seat in a quiet corner, preparing for a routine consultation. I did not anticipate the sudden toxic disruption that was about to unfold. Well, look who finally decided to show her face in public. The voice sliced through the ambient noise of the clinic, sharp, loud, and entirely devoid of basic social decorum. I looked up. Brenda was standing near the digital donor wall, holding a clipboard and flanked by the clinic head veterinarian. She wore a pristine tailored pantsuit, exuding the arrogant authority of a woman who believed her financial contributions purchased ownership of the building. She was acting in her capacity as a member of the clinic fundraising board, reviewing renovation plans with the senior staff. Brenda did not lower her voice. She intended to weaponize the crowded waiting room, utilizing the captive audience of pet owners to inflict maximum public humiliation. She marched across the lobby, stopping a few feet from where I sat. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Barnaby, then shifted her glaring, hostile gaze to me. Dr. Evans, Brenda announced, addressing the head veterinarian, but ensuring her voice carried to every corner of the room. I demand that you confiscate this animal immediately. This woman is a known neighborhood menace. She was terminated from her municipal position yesterday for severe ethical violations and erratic hostile behavior. The entire waiting room fell silent. Pet owners stopped flipping through magazines and looked up, their expressions shifting from polite curiosity to alarmed concern. Brenda fed on their attention, her posture puffing up with righteous indignation. She is unemployed, mentally unstable, and entirely unfit to care for a senior animal. Brenda continued, her tone dripping with manufactured concern. We have multiple sworn affidavits from the Homeowners Association documenting her neglect. She allows that poor creature to wander dangerous construction zones, and she clearly cannot afford to provide adequate medical care now that she is destitute. She turned back to the head veterinarian, her voice hardening into a command. As a major donor to this facility, I insist you place this dog under protective custody and transfer him to a specialized rescue organization. Do not let her leave this building with him. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the ambush was staggering. She had attempted to murder my dog 3 days ago. Now she was utilizing her philanthropic status to publicly brand me an abuser and orchestrate his legal confiscation right in front of me. She wanted to strip away the last remaining source of comfort I possessed, executing the theft under the guise of an animal welfare intervention. The head veterinarian, a man clearly uncomfortable with the sudden confrontation, cleared his throat nervously. Brenda, please. This is highly irregular. We cannot simply confiscate an animal without a formal court order or clear evidence of immediate life-threatening abuse. Brenda scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. She is a hazard, Dr. Evans. Look at her. She is unhinged. If you let her walk out of here, the blood is on your hands when that animal turns up dead. I remained seated. I did not leap to my feet to scream obscenities. I did not engage in a frantic emotional defense of my character. When an adversary attempts to draw you into a public hysterical shouting match, responding with matching volume only validates their claim of instability. I calmly unhooked Barnaby leash from the chair leg. I stood up, my movements slow, deliberate, and radiating an absolute chilling calm. I looked directly at the head veterinarian, ignoring Brenda entirely. Dr. Evans, I stated, my voice level and ringing with professional authority. I am here for the scheduled follow-up regarding the acute brodifacoum toxicity my dog suffered 72 hours ago. I assume you have the preliminary toxicology reports and the gastric lavage analysis confirming the ingestion of commercial-grade rodenticide. Dr. Evans nodded quickly, eager to shift the conversation back to medical facts. Yes, Lauren. The toxicology screen confirmed massive exposure. It was a near-fatal dose. I shifted my gaze, slowly locking eyes with Brenda. Her triumphant smirk faltered slightly. The mention of the specific poison had introduced a variable she did not anticipate. She expected me to cry and beg. She did not expect a clinical recitation of a toxicology report. It is fascinating how a near-fatal dose of rat poison finds its way into a fenced, secure residential backyard. I remarked my tone conversational, but laced with a lethal, unspoken threat. It implies a targeted, premeditated delivery method. A delivery method that theoretically could have been captured on high-resolution infrared surveillance equipment. The color drained instantly from Brenda's face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound emerged. The arrogant, commanding donor was suddenly replaced by a woman who realized she might have just walked blindly into a meticulously laid trap. She stared at me, searching my calm, unreadable expression for any sign that I was bluffing. I offered a small, cold smile. I am sure the authorities will find the toxicology report incredibly useful when they review the accompanying video evidence of the attempted poisoning, I concluded. I did not wait for her to formulate a response. I did not press the advantage to humiliate her further in front of the silent waiting room. Winning a shouting match in a veterinary lobby was a petty, insignificant victory. I was not interested in scoring points. I was interested in absolute destruction. I turned away from her, gently guiding Barnaby toward the exit. "We are leaving Dr. Evans," I informed the veterinarian over my shoulder. "Please forward the complete medical file and the formal toxicology results to my secure email. My legal counsel will require the certified documentation by the end of the day." I walked out of the clinic, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me, cutting off the stunned silence of the lobby. I had delivered the warning shot directly to her face. Brenda now knew that I possessed the evidence of her crime. The panic I had just instilled in her would act as an accelerant. She would run straight to Councilman Davis, desperate to expedite the extortion plot before I could initiate formal legal action. I loaded Barnaby into the car and started the engine. I did not feel the sting of the public insults. The humiliation she attempted to inflict bounced off the armor of my tactical advantage. I had not retreated out of fear. I had retreated because I needed them to rush their next move. The trap was fully armed, and I wanted them sprinting toward the trigger. The fallout from the confrontation at the veterinary clinic materialized with breathtaking speed. Brenda panic had clearly infected Councilman Davis, forcing them to accelerate their timeline and abandon any pretense of bureaucratic subtlety. They wanted the property secured and my silence guaranteed before I could leverage the surveillance footage. I arrived home shortly after 1 in the afternoon. A sleek black courier van was idling at the curb in front of my house. A man in a sharp suit walked up my driveway and handed me a thick, heavy envelope sealed with the embossed logo of a prominent downtown law firm, signed for receipt. The courier instructed, his tone entirely devoid of courtesy. I signed the digital pad, took the envelope, and locked myself inside my house. I carried the package into my home office, setting it on the desk next to the encrypted drive containing the infrared video files. I sliced the thick paper open. Inside was a comprehensive legal packet. The header on the primary document read, "Global Settlement and Property Transfer Agreement." I sat down and read the clauses carefully, my mind dissecting the aggressive legal framework they had constructed. The document was a masterclass in extortion, drafted by high-priced attorneys who specialized in bullying vulnerable citizens into submission. The terms were brutal and completely uncompromising. Horizon Properties, the shell company controlled by Davis and Brenda, offered to purchase my home for a sum that barely covered the outstanding balance of my mortgage. The offer represented less than 30% of the actual market value of the parcel. In exchange for my signature transferring the deed, the agreement outlined a series of coercive concessions. First, Councilman Davis agreed to formally rescind the fabricated municipal zoning abatement order, miraculously resolving the boundary dispute that threatened to demolish my home. Second, the Homeowners Association, acting under the executive authority of Brenda, agreed to withdraw all pending fines, aesthetic violations, and the fabricated complaints regarding my professional conduct that had led to my corporate suspension. They promised to issue a formal retraction to my former employer, theoretically allowing me to salvage my career. Finally, the agreement explicitly demanded that I surrender all video, audio, or physical evidence relating to any disputes with neighboring property owners. It contained a punitive non-disclosure clause forbidding me from discussing the sale, the municipal actions, or the poisoning incident under threat of devastating financial damages. It was a perfectly engineered hostage negotiation. They were offering me a clean slate and the restoration of my professional reputation, but the ransom was my home and my absolute silence. I flipped to the final page of the packet. Tucked beneath the signature block was a separate piece of heavy, embossed cardstock. It was an invitation. The elegant cursive script announced the annual Autumn Charity Gala, hosted by Brenda at her sprawling estate next door, scheduled for the following evening. A small handwritten note was clipped to the invitation. The handwriting was sharp and precise. Lauren, the note read, "The settlement offer expires at the conclusion of my gala tomorrow night. Bring the signed agreement to the event. We can finalize the transfer privately in my study. If you fail to deliver the signature, the abatement order precedes the police report regarding your animal neglect will be filed, and the association will initiate foreclosure proceedings on your unpaid fines. Make the smart choice. Brenda." I stared at the handwritten threat. The sheer, overwhelming arrogance required to issue such a demand was staggering. She was not simply demanding that I surrender my home. She was demanding that I perform my surrender publicly. She wanted me to walk into her lavish, catered event, surrounded by the local political elite and the wealthy socialites she courted, and hand over the deed to my life. She wanted me to stand in the shadow of her massive illuminated house, broken and defeated, confirming her absolute dominance over the neighborhood. She viewed the gala not just as a fundraiser, but as a coronation. My capitulation was meant to be the crown jewel of her evening. I leaned back in my office chair, the heavy legal documents resting on my lap. The air in the room felt still and charged with potential energy. Brenda and Davis believed they had executed a flawless checkmate. They had leveraged the entire weight of the municipal government, the homeowners association, and a high-powered legal team to crush a single isolated resident. They assumed the threat of total financial and professional ruin would force me to sign the predatory agreement. They were confident that the fear of losing everything would paralyze my critical thinking. They were operating under a fatal miscalculation. They believed I was fighting to save a house. I was not fighting for real estate. I was fighting to dismantle a criminal enterprise. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Jamal's secure line. He answered immediately, the sound of typing echoing in the background. "Did you receive the package?" Jamal asked, skipping the greetings. "I received a predatory settlement agreement demanding I sign over the deed for 30 cents on the dollar." I confirmed, my voice cold and focused. "They are offering to withdraw the zoning violations and the corporate complaints in exchange for the property and my silence. They gave me 48 hours. Jamal let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "Classic blockbusting extortion. They create a catastrophic liability, then offer to buy the asset at a massive discount to relieve the pressure. It is elegant if you ignore the multiple federal felonies required to execute it." I pulled the embossed invitation from the stack of papers. She also invited me to her autumn gala tomorrow night. She wants me to hand-deliver the signed contract during the party. She wants me to submit while she is surrounded by her political allies. The line went silent for a few seconds. Jamal was processing the tactical implications of the demand. "She is building a stage, Lauren," Jamal said quietly, the analytical edge sharpening in his tone. "She wants an audience for your defeat." I looked at the encrypted hard drive resting on my desk. The drive containing the infrared footage of the poisoning, the audio recording of the corrupt zoning conspiracy, and the financial routing numbers linking the city funds to Brenda private accounts. "I know she is building a stage," I replied, a dark, anticipatory smile finally breaking across my face. "And I intend to use it. I do not want to fight this in civil court for 3 years, Jamal." I continued, my voice hardening into absolute resolve. "I do not want to file a quiet complaint and wait for the local authorities to bury it. They want a public spectacle. We are going to give them one they will never forget." "What is the operational timeline?" Jamal asked, instantly shifting into execution mode. "We have 36 hours before the gala begins," I stated, checking my watch. "I need you to finalize the financial linkage between the Horizon Properties shell accounts and Davis Municipal Consulting Funds. We are not negotiating with local authorities. We are taking the entire dossier over their heads." I ended the call and looked out my office window. The cedar fence was gone, leaving my yard completely exposed to Brenda's massive, imposing property next door. I could see the caterers already arriving, beginning to erect the large white tents on her manicured lawn for the gala tomorrow night. She was preparing for a victory celebration. I picked up the extortion settlement, the predatory contract designed to steal my home, and I fed it directly into the paper shredder beside my desk. The machine whined, reducing the high-priced legal threats to ribbons of useless paper. I had absolutely no intention of signing a surrender. I was preparing a declaration of total war, and the battlefield she had chosen was absolutely perfect for her destruction. The 48 hours leading up to the autumn gala were a masterclass in controlled tactical silence. I did not order moving boxes. I did not contact real estate agents to evaluate the predatory offer from Horizon Properties. I did not engage in desperate, tearful phone calls with Brenda or Councilman Davis, begging for an extension. I vanished entirely into the secure environment of Jamal Home Office, operating under a strict blackout protocol. We were not preparing a defense. We were constructing a federal indictment. Jamal Office resembled a forensic command center. The 3 large monitors glowed with cascading data streams, complex financial flowcharts, and encrypted municipal databases. The air in the room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the intense, focused energy of 2 professionals actively dismantling a criminal syndicate. "The local authorities are compromised," I stated, staring at a printout of the Municipal Zoning Board directory. "Councilman Davis has installed loyalists across the Planning Commission and the local police precincts. If I walk into a city station with this evidence, the files will mysteriously vanish into the bureaucratic void, and Davis will be tipped off before a detective even opens the folder." Jamal nodded without looking away from his screen. His fingers moved across his mechanical keyboard in a rapid, unbroken rhythm. "We do not play on their home field, Lauren. We bypass the local infrastructure entirely. We escalate this directly to the state level." He initiated a secure, encrypted connection, utilizing his credentials as a state investigative auditor to access restricted financial monitoring networks. "I need to definitively link the audio recording from your backyard to the municipal funds." Jamal explained, his eyes scanning the dense rows of transactional data. Davis stated on the recording that the investment fund would release a $10 million payout once your property was vacated. I need to find where that capital is waiting. He executed a complex series of search algorithms, cross-referencing the Shell Corporation, Horizon Properties, with recent municipal development grants approved by Davis Committee. The breakthrough occurred just past 2 a.m. on Friday. "Got it," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a low, satisfied register. He tapped the center monitor. I leaned over his shoulder. The screen displayed a convoluted web of wire transfers originating from a state-subsidized urban redevelopment grant funneling through 3 separate holding companies and finally resting in a blind trust account managed by a prominent local law firm. The law firm representing Brenda Homeowners Association. I noted the final puzzle piece locking into place. "Exactly." Jamal confirmed, a cold smile touching his lips. "It is a classic municipal embezzlement structure. Davis uses his political influence to secure state development grants for urban renewal. He funnels the money through shell companies controlled by Brenda. They use the association bylaws and fabricated zoning violations to forcefully acquire residential properties at predatory discounts. Once the block is consolidated, they sell the unified parcel to a major commercial developer and launder the massive profit through the blind trust." He highlighted the crucial data point. "And the audio recording you captured proves premeditation, extortion, and intent to defraud. It transforms a complex financial investigation into a slam-dunk racketeering case. We had the complete picture. The weapon was fully assembled. The next step was delivering it to the executioner. I did not file a complaint with the City Human Resources Department regarding my suspension. I did not attempt to clear my name locally. My acceptance of the suspension had been a calculated tactical maneuver. By allowing Davis to strip me of my municipal badge, he inadvertently removed the bureaucratic red tape that bound me to the local government hierarchy. I was no longer a subordinate employee required to follow the internal chain of command. I was a private citizen, and I possessed a very specific, highly potent professional contact. Prior to my tenure as a district director, I had worked as a specialized compliance liaison for the State Attorney General Office, coordinating interagency task forces focused on municipal corruption. I had maintained those relationships carefully. I picked up my secure personal cell phone and dialed a direct unlisted number I had committed to memory years ago. The line rang twice before a sharp, authoritative voice answered. "Special Investigations Division, Agent Miller speaking." "Agent Miller, this is Lauren," I said, keeping my voice level and perfectly calm. "I require an immediate secure channel to the Deputy Attorney General. I have acquired actionable, irrefutable evidence of a massive, coordinated municipal racketeering and extortion ring operating within District 4. The operation involves a sitting city councilman and the fraudulent diversion of state redevelopment grants." The pause on the other end of the line was brief. Agent Miller recognized my voice, and he respected my professional assessment. He knew I did not initiate secure channels for trivial matters. "Hold the line, Lauren," Miller instructed. "Routing you now." Within 90 seconds, I was connected to the Deputy Attorney General. I did not offer a rambling emotional narrative. I delivered a precise forensic briefing. I detailed the blockbusting operation, the use of the Homeowners Association as an extortion tool, the fabricated zoning abatement orders, and the targeted financial sabotage designed to force property sales. Finally, I informed him of the infrared surveillance footage and the directional audio recording capturing Councilman Davis explicitly discussing the illegal operation and the impending $10 million payout. The silence from the Deputy Attorney General was absolute as he absorbed the magnitude of the intelligence. "You have the audio files secured?" he asked, his tone shifting into immediate operational urgency. "I have the raw audio, the high-definition video, and the complete forensic financial tracing, linking the shell companies to the state grants compiled by a certified state investigative auditor," I confirmed. "The evidence package is airtight, and it is ready for immediate transfer via secure state portal. Upload the package immediately," the deputy ordered. "If the documentation verifies your briefing, we have enough to secure federal warrants by tomorrow morning. Where are the primary targets currently located?" I looked out Jamal's office window into the dark, quiet suburban night. "The targets are hosting a major charity gala tomorrow evening at the central property in question," I replied, a cold, strategic satisfaction settling over me. "Councilman Davis and the primary co-conspirator will be present, surrounded by the local political elite they believe protects them." The Deputy Attorney General understood the tactical advantage immediately. "Do not engage them locally, Lauren. Do not tip your hand. Let them proceed with the event. We will coordinate our response teams accordingly." I ended the call and looked at Jamal. He was already initiating the secure data transfer, uploading the massive encrypted dossier directly to the state servers. The trap was fully armed, the authorities were mobilized, and the local political shield Davis relied upon had been entirely bypassed. They were preparing a lavish celebration, completely unaware that the guest list was about to be forcibly amended by the state police. I drove back to my house as dawn broke over the city. I walked through the quiet, empty rooms. The threat of the demolition order no longer held any power. It was merely a piece of paper, a documented felony waiting to be prosecuted. I checked on Barnaby, who was sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and strong. I walked to my bedroom closet and bypassed my standard muted professional attire. I selected a sharp, impeccably tailored black suit. I polished my shoes. I gathered a sleek leather portfolio case. I was not going to the autumn gala to beg for my home or sign a surrender document. I was going to deliver a message, and I intended to look exactly like the executive they had foolishly attempted to destroy. The net was cast, the predator was waiting, and it was time to step onto the stage they had built for my execution. The autumn gala was a masterclass in suburban ostentation. Brenda's expansive backyard had been transformed into an exclusive high society enclave. Massive illuminated white tents stretched across the manicured lawns. Crystal chandeliers rented at exorbitant expense hung suspended from the sturdy branches of the ancient oak trees. Waitstaff in crisp white jackets moved seamlessly through the crowd, offering premium champagne and delicate overpriced hors d'oeuvres. The guest list was a curated assembly of the local elite. Prominent business owners, wealthy association members, and key political allies mingled in the crisp autumn air. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, self-satisfied hum of people celebrating their own perceived untouchability. At the center of it all, holding court near a towering floral arrangement, stood Councilman Davis. He was laughing warmly, accepting congratulations on his newly proposed urban development initiative, the very initiative designed to bulldoze my home. I parked my car a block away and walked toward the estate. I did not wear an evening gown. I wore a tailored, razor-sharp black suit, a crisp white blouse, and dark polished heels. I carried a sleek leather portfolio case. I looked exactly like what I was, a high-level compliance executive arriving to execute a hostile audit. I bypassed the velvet ropes and the guest registry podium at the front entrance. I walked straight up the paved driveway and around to the sprawling rear gardens. The private security guard stationed at the perimeter barely registered my presence, assuming from my authoritative posture and professional attire that I was a member of the event management team or a late-arriving corporate sponsor. I stepped onto the meticulously maintained grass and walked deliberately into the center of the illuminated party. My presence acted like a sudden localized drop in atmospheric pressure. The visual contrast was immediate and jarring. Amidst the sea of pastel cocktail dresses and tailored tuxedos, my stark black suit signaled a distinct, uninvited disruption. The conversations nearest to me faltered. The sudden quiet rippled outward, spreading rapidly through the crowd. Heads turned, glasses paused halfway to lips. The soft, ambient jazz, played by a live quartet on the patio, seemed to amplify as the human noise evaporated. Brenda saw me first. She was standing near the portable bar, clutching a crystal flute of champagne, wearing a heavily beaded silver gown that caught the light with every movement. Her triumphant, hostly smile froze instantly. The color drained from her face, only to be replaced seconds later by a deep, furious crimson flush that crept up her neck. She slammed her champagne flute down onto a nearby cocktail table. The glass tipped, spilling expensive liquid across the pristine white linen, but she did not care. The illusion of her perfect gala had been breached. "What the hell is she doing here?" Brenda shrieked, abandoning all pretense of high society decorum. Her voice sliced through the elegant silence, shrill and panicked. She frantically signaled to a group of 3 large, imposing private security guards stationed near the rear exits. They abandoned their posts immediately, rushing across the lawn to intercept me. "Get this crazy bitch out of here," Brenda commanded, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. "She is trespassing. She has absolutely no right to be on this property. Drag her out to the street." The security guards closed the distance rapidly, forming a tight, aggressive semicircle around me. They were massive men hired to intimidate and physically handle unruly elements. They expected me to shrink back to panic or to scream hysterically, playing perfectly into the narrative Brenda had constructed of a mentally unstable, erratic neighbor. I did not retreat a single inch. I did not raise my hands in a defensive posture. I stood perfectly still, my spine rigid, my expression locked into a mask of cold, impenetrable authority. I met the gaze of the lead security guard, my eyes completely devoid of fear. "Do not touch me," I stated, my voice low, resonant, and carrying the absolute certainty of a woman who fully understood the legal boundaries of engagement. "If you lay a hand on me, I will ensure your private security license is revoked before the sun comes up." The sheer, unwavering confidence in my tone halted the guards mid-stride. They hesitated, looking uncertainly between my calm, executive demeanor and the shrieking, frantic woman in the silver gown. They were accustomed to handling drunk guests, not confronting professionals, issuing precise administrative threats. Brenda pushed past a group of startled investors and marched up to the security perimeter, her face twisted with a mixture of rage and desperate confusion. She had expected me to arrive, broken weeping, clutching the signed extortion settlement in a desperate bid to save myself from bankruptcy and criminal charges. She had built this stage specifically to witness my surrender. Instead, I had arrived looking like an executioner. "What is wrong with you?" Brenda hissed, stepping into my personal space, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, meant only for me. "I told you to bring the signed agreement. If you do not hand over that deed right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing, and then I will initiate the foreclosure on your house tomorrow morning." I looked down at her, taking in the heavy makeup, the expensive jewelry, and the profound, absolute ignorance of her situation. She was entirely blind to the predators circling her perimeter. "I did not come to your party, Brenda," I replied, my voice projecting clearly enough for the silent watching crowd to hear every single word. The guests leaned in, captivated by the sudden intense drama unfolding in the center of the gala. I raised the sleek leather portfolio case, holding it up slightly so the polished surface caught the light from the chandeliers overhead. I came to deliver the paperwork. I announced, my tone crisp and ringing with finality. The crowd exchanged bewildered, anxious glances. Councilman Davis, who had been watching the altercation from the patio, suddenly stiffened. The relaxed, jovial politician vanished, replaced by a man whose survival instincts had just been severely triggered. He recognized that my demeanor was not that of a defeated victim. It was the posture of someone who had successfully changed the rules of engagement. The trap Brenda had so carefully constructed was about to snap shut, and she was standing directly on the pressure plate. The uneasy silence blanketing the gala was broken by the slow, deliberate crunch of leather shoes on the manicured grass. Councilman Davis stepped down from the elevated patio, moving through the parted crowd with the arrogant swagger of a man who believed his political title rendered him immune to consequence. He held a crystal tumbler of bourbon in one hand, offering a patronizing, condescending smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He was attempting to de-escalate the situation through sheer arrogance, intending to minimize my presence and reassert control over the narrative Brenda was rapidly losing. Lauren Davis set his voice loud and artificially warm, adopting the tone of a disappointed but patient mentor. "I see you finally decided to see reason. You brought the signed transfer agreement for Horizon Properties." He stopped a few feet away, standing beside Brenda. He gestured dismissively toward the 3 security guards, signaling them to stand down. He wanted to handle this personally. He wanted the wealthy onlookers to witness his effective crisis management. "It is the smart play, Lauren." Davis continued, his smirk widening into a cold, predatory grin. "Sign the deed over, hand me the folder, and we can all move past this unfortunate neighborhood dispute without any further unpleasantness. Do not make a fool of yourself in front of these good people. You have already lost your job. Do not lose whatever shred of dignity you have left." He reached out his free hand, expecting me to meekly hand over the leather portfolio containing the surrender of my home. I did not hand him the portfolio. I stepped back slightly, a smooth, evasive maneuver that left his hand hovering awkwardly in the empty space between us. The smirk on his face faltered a flicker of genuine irritation, replacing his manufactured calm. I unzipped the leather portfolio. I did not pull out the predatory settlement agreement they had mailed me. I reached inside and retrieved a single oversized sheet of high-quality ledger paper. The document was printed in stark, undeniable black and white, featuring columns of numbers and official bank routing codes. I did not hand the document to him. I lifted it high and slammed it down flat onto the nearest cocktail table, right next to a tray of untouched caviar. The heavy paper hit the linen tablecloth with a sharp, definitive smack that echoed in the quiet night air. "You are absolutely right, Councilman Davis," I stated, my voice ringing out across the silent, captivated crowd. "We should stop making fools of ourselves." The guests nearest the table instinctively leaned forward, their eyes straining to read the bold headers printed across the top of the ledger. "Perhaps you can explain to your constituents." I continued, raising my volume, ensuring every politician, investor, and socialite in the backyard heard my words clearly. Why an urban redevelopment grant funded entirely by municipal tax dollars was routed through 3 blind shell companies and deposited directly into a private trust account controlled by Brenda. The atmosphere in the garden did not just shift, it shattered. The collective gasp from the surrounding guests was visceral. This was no longer a petty dispute over a property line or a noisy dog. This was a public, highly specific allegation of massive political corruption and the embezzlement of taxpayer funds. Davis' face went completely slack. The color drained from his skin, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. His hand, still holding the tumbler of bourbon, began to tremble visibly. The ice clinked against the crystal, a loud, erratic sound betraying his sudden, catastrophic panic. "That is fabricated garbage," Brenda shrieked, her voice pitching into absolute hysteria. She lunged toward the table, attempting to snatch the ledger away. "She is a crazy, unemployed liar making up fake documents to ruin my party." I anticipated her movement. I planted my hand firmly over the document, securing it to the table, and met her frantic gaze with icy resolve. The routing numbers matched the municipal disbursements approved by Davis Committee last month. I countered, my voice cutting through her shrieks with surgical precision. The receiving trust lists you as the primary beneficiary. You are using taxpayer money to fund a blockbusting operation, terrorizing homeowners with fabricated zoning violations, so Horizon Properties can acquire the land for a commercial development deal worth $10 million. A prominent local business owner standing nearby cursed audibly, taking a distinct physical step away from Davis. The political allies and wealthy donors who had been toasting the councilman mere minutes ago now looked at him with profound, dawning horror. They realized they were standing in the middle of a massive racketeering operation, and they wanted absolutely no proximity to the impending blast radius. Davis opened his mouth to speak, to deploy his usual smooth rhetoric to spin the narrative back into his favor, but his throat seized. He was looking at a document that required access to restricted state financial databases. He realized with crushing clarity that a terminated municipal director could not possibly possess that level of forensic data. He realized he was not fighting a desperate homeowner. He was fighting a coordinated high-level investigation. "This is slander." Davis finally managed to choke out his voice, a hoarse, ragged whisper. "I will sue you for everything you are worth. You cannot sue me for reading public financial records out loud, Davis." I replied, my expression hardening into a mask of pure contempt. "You tried to steal my home to build a shopping mall. You tried to destroy my career to ensure my silence. You thought the local authorities would protect you." I stepped away from the table, leaving the damning ledger resting under the harsh glare of the outdoor lighting. "You forgot one critical detail when you initiated this extortion," I said, locking eyes with the corrupt politician. "You assumed I was fighting this battle alone. The humiliation had completely inverted. The wealthy elite were no longer staring at me with disdain. They were staring at Davis and Brenda with absolute, unadulterated revulsion. The grand, opulent Gala had transformed into a public tribunal, and the defendants were drowning in the irrefutable evidence of their own boundless greed. The trap was fully exposed, but the final devastating technological blow was yet to be delivered. The backyard of the estate moments ago, a scene of curated elegance, had dissolved into a tense, suffocating arena. The revelation of the financial ledger had struck Brenda and Councilman Davis with the force of a physical blow, stripping away their arrogant facades and exposing the panicked, cornered criminals underneath. Brenda's chest heaved as she stared at the damning document resting on the cocktail table. Her carefully constructed high society persona shattered completely. She spun wildly toward the string quartet situated on the elevated wooden deck near the pool. The musicians had lowered their instruments, watching the confrontation with wide, uncertain eyes. "Play something." Brenda screamed, her voice a shrill, hysterical command that scraped against the cool night air. "Turn on the main speakers. Drown her out. Turn the music up right now." She was desperate to silence me, operating under the frantic, irrational belief that if she could just mask my voice with loud classical music, the crisis would magically evaporate. She waved frantically at the audiovisual technician stationed near a large mixing console at the edge of the patio. The technician scrambled, his fingers flying across the soundboard. He slammed the master volume slider upward, attempting to flood the massive outdoor speakers with pre-recorded jazz tracks. The speakers emitted a sharp, high-pitched whine of static, followed instantly by absolute silence. The technician frowned, hitting the buttons with increasing urgency. Nothing happened. The entire sophisticated audiovisual network controlling the Gala had gone completely dead. Brenda shrieked in frustration, marching toward the technician. "Fix it, you idiot!" she demanded. I stood calmly in the center of the lawn, watching her unravel. She did not understand modern digital architecture. She did not realize that a wireless audiovisual system routing through a residential network was incredibly vulnerable. She did not know that parked in an unmarked van 3 streets over my brother-in-law Jamal was sitting behind a bank of encrypted laptops. Jamal had not merely traced their illicit finances. He had mapped the digital footprint of the entire estate. When I gave him the signal via a hidden transmitter in my pocket, he had seamlessly breached the local network and seized total administrative control of the party infrastructure. The massive high-definition projection screen, erected near the main catering tent, which had been proudly displaying the Horizon Properties corporate logo all evening, suddenly flickered. The sleek corporate graphics vanished. The screen went entirely black for 2 agonizing seconds. Then the stark grayscale footage of the infrared security camera snapped onto the massive display. The image was crystal clear, magnified to a towering scale. The entire party watched as the giant ghostly silhouette of Brenda, clad in her bathrobe, crept to the edge of my property line. The high-definition lens captured the malicious, calculating intent on her face as she tossed the dark lump of poisoned meat over the invisible boundary. The collective gasp from the wealthy guests was visceral. This was not a complex financial spreadsheet they had to interpret. This was undeniable visual proof of premeditated animal cruelty broadcast in towering proportions. But the visual evidence was only the prelude. The massive outdoor speakers, which the technician had been unable to activate, suddenly roared to life. They did not play jazz. They broadcast the isolated, digitally enhanced audio recording Jamal had extracted from the parabolic microphones. The crisp, unmistakable voice of Councilman Davis thundered across the manicured lawns, echoing off the sides of the white catering tents. "I secured the municipal abatement signatures this afternoon." The giant, disembodied voice of Davis declared the sound quality pristine and damning. "The Planning Commission stamped the zoning violation. It will hit her mailbox on Thursday." The real Councilman Davis, standing mere feet away from me, stumbled backward, as if he had been physically struck. His eyes darted wildly, searching for the source of the audio, his hands flying up to his head in a futile attempt to block out his own confession. "Are they ready with the buyout offer?" The recorded voice of Brenda asked, her tone callous and greedy, filling the night air. "They are prepared to execute the cash transfer the moment she signs the deed." The recorded Davis replied smoothly, his arrogance magnified 100-fold by the massive speakers. "We just need to force the compliance bitch out of that house, and the investment fund will release the $10 million development payout to our escrow accounts." The recording laid bare the entire criminal conspiracy in their own words. It confirmed the fabricated zoning violations, the predatory buyout strategy, and the massive illicit financial payoff waiting at the end of their blockbusting operation. It was a flawless, undeniable confession of federal racketeering played at maximum volume to an audience of the city's most influential citizens. The reaction of the crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The local politicians, the wealthy donors, the prominent business leaders who had funded Davis campaigns and attended Brenda lavish parties reacted as if the ground beneath them had suddenly become toxic. They did not whisper. They did not politely excuse themselves. They physically recoiled. A prominent state senator who had been laughing with Davis 20 minutes prior turned his back entirely and began walking rapidly toward the exit gates, motioning for his aides to follow. The investors who had been courting Horizon Properties stared at Davis with open, unadulterated disgust, realizing how close they had come to being implicated in a massive fraud scandal. The carefully constructed social and political armor shielding Brenda and Davis shattered completely. The elite guests treated them like radioactive liabilities, creating a wide, empty circle of pristine grass around the 2 ruined conspirators. Brenda dropped to her knees on the lawn, covering her ears, sobbing hysterically as the recording of her own malicious voice echoed around her. The grand, opulent stage she had built to witness my destruction had been perfectly hijacked. It was now serving as the platform for her total, absolute annihilation. The truth was laid bare, and there was no amount of political influence or homeowners association power that could silence the undeniable facts currently broadcasting across the estate. The recorded voices echoing from the massive outdoor speakers finally ceased, leaving a ringing, stunned silence in their wake. Councilman Davis stood in the center of the manicured lawn, surrounded by the retreating figures of his former political allies and wealthy donors. His face was contorted into a mask of desperate, cornered rage. The smooth, polished veneer of the untouchable politician had burned away entirely, leaving a man terrified of the impending consequences. He frantically pulled his cell phone from his breast pocket, his fingers shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He realized the strategic nightmare he was currently trapped in. The evidence of his corruption had been broadcast to the elite, but he believed he still controlled the immediate physical environment. He believed he still held the leash of the local law enforcement. "Captain!" Davis roared, his voice cracking with hysteria as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "Captain Reynolds, get over here right now." Standing near the perimeter of the catering tent, sipping coffee and enjoying the catered food, was the captain of the local municipal police precinct. Davis had personally ensured the captain presence, hiring off-duty officers to provide a visible, authoritative security detail for the gala. He had placed the captain on his payroll to guarantee that any minor disturbances were handled quietly and in his favor. Captain Reynolds jogged across the lawn, his hand resting instinctively on his duty belt. He looked confused and deeply alarmed by the sudden chaotic turn of events. "Arrest this woman immediately," Davis commanded, spit flying from his lips in his frenzy. "She is trespassing on private property. She has illegally wiretapped a public official, and she is distributing fabricated, slanderous materials to incite a public disturbance. Cuff her and get her out of my sight." Captain Reynolds hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting between the furious, powerful councilman and me, standing calmly in my black suit. He was a local cop, bound by the political hierarchy of the city. Councilman Davis controlled his department funding. He unclipped the heavy metal handcuffs from his belt and took a decisive step toward me. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, his tone gruff and authoritative. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest." I did not step back. I did not raise my hands in a defensive posture or attempt to argue with the local captain. Engaging with a subordinate officer operating under corrupt orders was a tactical waste of time. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Councilman Davis, the architect of the corruption. I reached slowly and deliberately into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I did not pull out a weapon. I withdrew the leather identification case that the Municipal Human Resources Department believed they had confiscated yesterday morning. I held the leather case up, letting the ambient light from the crystal chandeliers catch the surface. I did not show them the standard municipal identification card. With a swift flick of my wrist, I flipped the leather case open, revealing the heavy polished brass shield embedded securely on the opposite side. The badge caught the light, gleaming with undeniable absolute authority. It did not bear the seal of the local municipal government. It bore the stark, uncompromising crest of the State Attorney General office. The payoff detonated with devastating precision. I was not merely a district director of municipal services. For the past 6 months, operating under deep cover, I had been an embedded special investigator for the State Attorney General Anti-Corruption Task Force. My role as a compliance executive was the perfect vantage point to monitor the flow of municipal contracts and identify systemic irregularities. Davis and Brenda had not targeted a helpless, isolated homeowner. They had attempted to extort an active undercover state investigator. "You do not possess the authority to order my arrest, Davis." I stated, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lawn, striking with the force of a physical blow. Captain Reynolds stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the brass shield in my hand, the color instantly draining from his face. He recognized the seal. He understood the hierarchy of law enforcement. A local precinct captain does not arrest a state investigator carrying a badge from the highest legal office in the jurisdiction. To do so would constitute a severe federal offense. He slowly, carefully lowered the handcuffs, taking 3 distinct steps backward, visibly distancing himself from the toxic command Davis had just issued. Davis stared at the badge, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of absolute terror. His eyes darted frantically, trying to process the magnitude of his fatal miscalculation. "I did not record you illegally, Davis." I continued, my tone cold, relentless, and completely unyielding. The surveillance equipment monitoring my property line was authorized under an active state warrant approved by a federal judge, specifically tasked with investigating your prolonged history of municipal extortion and blockbusting. Davis staggered backward, clutching his chest. He realized that every single move he had made, every threat he had issued, and every corrupt order he had given over the past month had been documented, recorded, and added to a massive federal indictment. "And your attempt to silence me yesterday," I said, delivering the final crushing legal reality. "Your decision to manipulate the Human Resources Department to suspend me and confiscate my municipal identification was the final piece of evidence we required. The suspension order you orchestrated was not a victory. It was the definitive act required to upgrade your charges to felony obstruction of a federal investigation. The trap had sprung entirely. The illusion of his political invincibility shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. He had handed me the exact weapon required to destroy him, wrapped in his own staggering arrogance. He had believed he was hunting prey, entirely unaware that he had walked willingly into a cage designed specifically for him. The local authorities were neutralized. His political allies had fled, and the crushing weight of the state justice system was about to descend upon him with unstoppable force. The deafening silence that gripped the Gala was shattered not by another revelation, but by a sound that tore through the crisp autumn night with terrifying urgency. The wail of multiple heavy-duty sirens echoed in the distance, growing rapidly louder, consuming the ambient noise of the affluent neighborhood. The wail was distinct, aggressive, and entirely unlike the standard sirens of the local municipal police. It was the unmistakable sound of state troopers mobilizing in force. 4 massive, unmarked black SUVs, their grills flashing with aggressive strobe lights, careened past the private security checkpoint at the end of the long driveway. The heavy vehicles did not slow down to negotiate the gravel path. They tore across the pristine, manicured lawns of the estate, their heavy tires ripping deep, muddy trenches through the expensive turf. They formed a tight tactical perimeter around the main gathering area, effectively sealing off any potential avenues of escape. The doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. Over a dozen heavily armed state agents wearing tactical vests, emblazoned with the prominent gold lettering of the Attorney General office, poured out of the vehicles. They moved with swift, coordinated, and terrifying efficiency, bypassing the stunned wealthy guests and the paralyzed local security guards. The lead agent, a tall, severe woman with a deeply serious demeanor, strode directly toward the center of the lawn where Davis and Brenda stood frozen in shock. Councilman Arthur Davis, the agent, announced, her voice booming with undeniable legal authority. "And Brenda Carmichael, you are both under arrest on federal warrants for systemic racketeering, municipal embezzlement, and felony extortion." The reality of their destruction finally breached Brenda hysterical denial. The illusion of her untouchable suburban empire evaporated instantly. She let out a piercing, guttural shriek as 2 state agents flanked her, grabbing her arms forcefully. "This is a mistake," Brenda screamed, thrashing wildly against the firm grip of the agents. Her heavy beaded silver gown caught the harsh flashing lights of the SUVs. "You cannot do this to me. I am the president of the association. I have friends in the mayor office. Tell them, Davis. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." She turned her desperate, pleading eyes toward the powerful politician she had relied upon to shield her corruption. She expected him to deploy his influence to make a phone call and magically dissolve the nightmare. Councilman Davis offered no assistance. He did not attempt to negotiate or assert his political immunity. The crushing realization that his career, his freedom, and his entire life were definitively over hit him with devastating physical force. His knees simply ceased to function. He crumpled onto the damp grass, his tailored suit wrinkling pathetically as he lost all muscle control. An agent stepped forward firmly, hauling the incapacitated politician back to his feet. He pulled Davis' arms roughly behind his back, the sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping closed, echoing clearly over the frantic murmurs of the crowd. They hauled him away, half carrying the broken man toward the waiting transport vehicles. Brenda followed, sobbing hysterically, her expensive high heels lost somewhere in the mud. The spectacle of their ruin was absolute and entirely public. The very people they had invited to witness my surrender, the elite investors and high society politicians they had courted to fund their fraudulent empire, now stood as silent, disgusted witnesses to their arrest. Hundreds of smartphones were raised, capturing every agonizing second of their humiliation. The footage of the corrupt councilman and the tyrannical neighborhood president being shoved into the back of state police vehicles would dominate the regional news networks before morning. I stood calmly near the edge of the patio, watching the agents secure the prisoners. I felt no urge to gloat. I did not taunt them as they were marched past me. The profound satisfaction did not stem from their tears or their pathetic pleas. It stemmed from the cold, undeniable effectiveness of a meticulously executed legal strategy. The arrests were merely the tactical spearhead. The administrative dismantling of their empire commenced simultaneously. State financial auditors coordinating directly with Jamal Network initiated an immediate comprehensive freeze on every single asset connected to the Horizon Properties Shell Corporation. The blind trusts were seized. The municipal development grants were frozen pending total forensic review. Brenda personal bank accounts, the very funds she had utilized to hire contractors to destroy my fence and tow my car, were locked down completely. The predatory settlement agreement they had attempted to force upon me was rendered entirely void. The fabricated zoning abatement order threatening my home was immediately rescinded by emergency mandate from the state office, invalidating the fraudulent municipal action. The entire foundation of lies, coercion, and corruption they had built to steal homes and launder money was reduced to ash in the span of 30 minutes. They had attempted to crush me using the bureaucratic machinery of the city. I had simply stepped outside their localized jurisdiction and brought the crushing weight of the federal justice system down upon their heads. The long, agonizing siege was over. The neighborhood tyrant and her corrupt political shield were permanently removed, their power stripped, their assets seized, and their futures confined to the stark reality of a federal courtroom. The fortress they believed was impenetrable had fallen without a single stone left standing. The passage of time always provides the sharpest perspective on a battlefield. 30 days after the sirens faded and the flashing lights vanished from the neighborhood, the structural changes became permanent. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror adjusting the collar of a structured charcoal blazer. I paired it with dark tailored trousers and polished leather heels. It was not a uniform of defense. It was the attire of a reigning authority preparing to take command of her territory. I drove downtown, parking in the reserved subterranean structure beneath the municipal administration building. The air felt different today, stripped of the oppressive bureaucratic dread that used to linger in these concrete corridors. I walked through the revolving glass doors, stepping onto the polished granite floor of the main lobby. The rhythmic click of my heels echoed through the cavernous space, drawing the attention of the front desk personnel. The same 2 building security officers who had flanked me during my humiliating expulsion 4 weeks prior were standing near the turnstiles. They recognized me instantly. They did not step forward to block my path or demand identification. They lowered their gaze to the floor, stepping aside to grant me unobstructed passage. They understood the new hierarchy. I bypassed the standard elevators and keyed into the executive lift, riding directly to the top floor. The doors parted, revealing the expansive suite designated for the highest-ranking city officials. I did not return to reclaim my former position as a district director. I was stepping into a newly created role sanctioned directly by the State Attorney General and the Federal Oversight Committee, tasked with restructuring the corrupt local government. I walked into the main boardroom. The remaining department heads, including the Human Resources Director, who had blindly followed the fabricated suspension orders, were already seated around the long oak table. They looked up as I entered. The tension in the room was palpable, heavy with the unspoken acknowledgement of their complicity and my elevation. I took the seat at the head of the table. I placed my leather portfolio on the wood surface, folding my hands over it. I did not demand apologies. I did not gloat over the empty chair where the corrupt councilman used to sit. The federal indictments had already spoken for me. I am assuming the role of Regional Executive Director for Urban Development and Compliance. I stated, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with unyielding authority. My mandate includes total oversight of all municipal zoning projects, property acquisitions, and departmental ethics audits. We are initiating a comprehensive review of every contract approved in this district over the past 5 years. The Human Resources Director swallowed hard, her face pale, nodding in silent, terrified submission. The people who had traded their integrity for political favor were now directly accountable to the woman they had attempted to discard. I had returned not as their colleague, but as their reckoning. The transition of power extended far beyond the walls of the municipal building. Later that afternoon, I drove back to my quiet suburban street. The oppressive, suffocating regime of the local homeowners association had dissolved overnight. Without their tyrannical president and her political shield, the board had fractured, resigning in disgrace to avoid the ongoing federal probes into their discriminatory fining practices. I parked in my driveway and looked across the property line. The sprawling, ostentatious estate next door stood entirely silent. The immaculate landscaping had already begun to decay, the edges of the lawn turning brown and brittle. Staked coldly into the center of the grass, right where the lavish catering tents had been erected a month ago, was a stark white and red wooden sign, bank-owned, notice of foreclosure. The private equity firm had moved with ruthless speed, seizing the asset the moment the fraudulent mortgage was exposed. The house was empty, stripped of its imported furniture and its arrogant inhabitants. The woman who had obsessed over sightlines and property values, who had threatened to euthanize an innocent animal over a fake boundary, was currently residing in a federal holding facility awaiting trial. She had traded her freedom and her home for a fleeting illusion of supremacy. The silence radiating from the seized property was the most beautiful sound in the neighborhood. I turned away from the ruin and walked through my front door. The air inside my house was warm, smelling of cedar and fresh coffee. I changed out of my business suit, opting for comfortable jeans and a soft woven sweater. I poured a cup of tea and opened the glass sliding doors leading to my backyard. The contractors I hired last week had finished their work. A brand new reinforced cedar fence stood tall and secure along the property line, creating an impenetrable private sanctuary. I walked out onto the patio and sat down in the wooden lounge chair. The late afternoon sun broke through the autumn clouds, casting long golden rays across the grass. Barnaby shuffled out of the house, his tail wagging in a slow, rhythmic greeting. His health had fully rebounded. The toxins were flushed from his system, and the fear had left his eyes. He approached my chair with a soft huff, circled twice, and laid his heavy golden head directly across my lap. I rested my hand on his warm fur, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. A moment later, a second dog trotted out onto the patio. He was a young, scruffy terrier mix, bursting with curious, hesitant energy. I had visited the local rescue shelter 3 days ago and brought him home. He represented a new chapter, an expansion of the safe haven I had fought so hard to protect. The terrier sniffed the edge of the patio, then curled up on a soft outdoor bed I had placed near my feet, soaking in the sunlight. I sat on my porch, surrounded by the quiet breathing of my dogs, and reflected on the storm I had navigated. Society often conditions us to believe that defending ourselves requires matching the volume and the cruelty of our attackers. We are taught that retaliation must be loud, emotional, and immediate. We are told to scream our truth until the other side submits. That is a flawed and dangerous strategy. Engaging a manipulator in a screaming match only gives them the emotional reaction they crave. It validates their attack. True strength is rooted in tactical silence. It is found in the discipline required to absorb an insult, collect the documentation, and wait for the precise moment to deploy the evidence. The corrupt politician and the neighborhood tyrant did not fall because I argued with them on a sidewalk. They fell because I let them write their own confessions while I quietly assembled the tribunal. There is a profound philosophy I carry with me now, forged in the fires of this conflict. When a bully throws stones at your house, do not pick them up and throw them back. Use those stones to build a wall they can never climb over. I built my wall out of compliance logs, infrared footage, and irrefutable financial data. I secured my territory, protected my family, and locked the gates permanently against the toxic elements of the world. The battle was fought in the shadows, but the peace I earned resonates in the broad daylight. If you are standing in the middle of a conflict feeling overwhelmed by people who use their titles to make you feel small, I hope my journey offers you a roadmap. Do not engage the chaos. Secure your perimeter, gather your proof, and let their own arrogance engineer their downfall. Have you ever used silence and hard facts to outsmart someone who thought they held all the power? Share your strategy in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story brought you a sense of vindication, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications for Hazel Tells Stories channel. We have many more battles to win together, and I will see you in the next story.